Cus D'Amato is one of those rare names in boxing that just instantly grabs your attention, commands respect. You think of Mike Tyson, Floyd Patterson, Jose Torres, men he guided to world titles. It's hard to really say enough good things about the great man. He was more than a trainer. He was a psychologist. He understood boxing on a very spiritual and fundamental level. He knew how to talk to young, troubled minds, to block out the outside world, control their fear, and become a very dangerous man when they slipped the gloves on. The problem with men whose reputation is so high is that they can end up being a little bit above criticism, which Cus, with one of the opinions I saw him giving, has fallen a little bit guilty of. The famous quote that George Foreman defeats all come-forward heavyweights is not necessarily something I completely agree with, but it's certainly an idea I can get behind more than the disparaging remarks Cus made about the great Jack Dempsey and his supposed chances against Muhammad Ali. I think most boxing fans will have seen the video clips on YouTube or wherever of Cus and Ali. I think it's 1970. They're both in formal attire and they're having a funny little spar. They're talking about Ali's chances against former greats. It's good fun. It's informative. Ali clearly has a lot of respect for the older man, who I think was 62 at the time, and impressively nimble with some of his counters to the body. But when it gets to Ali's chances against Jack Dempsey, and you think, oh right, yeah, the old boy's going to stick up for the old timers here, he absolutely rips Dempsey a new one. And I would have to say, as a self-appointed expert on the Manassa Mauler, that his opinion is unfair, and yes, I dare say it, ill-informed. Cus's main criticism that he levels at Dempsey is that he basically just leant forward, almost at a right angle, and advanced, crudely, that he'd be out of range, and that he wouldn't be able to do anything about it. And that Ali would just be able to jab his head off, no problem. He said he would be particularly vulnerable to your type of style. And the other part of this, which makes it quite amusing, is that Ali is put in the rare position of defending his opponent's chances. He's saying, well, hang on a minute. Did Dempsey just look at the floor like that? And Cus is like, no, well, he had to look up, but then he exposed his chin. And Ali can't wrap his head around it. He's thinking it's not going to be this easy. It's like, when it came to Joe Louis, so many people said Joe Louis would beat Ali. He had to push back and go no, and he had a bit of a pop at Joe for the slow feet and all that stuff. With Jack, he's having to big him up and go, well, look, no, this seems ridiculous. It's almost like you're saying this guy doesn't have much self-awareness, when we all know this is the man who wrote Championship Fighting, which is a very respected boxing book, got reprinted, loads of people have got it, which talks about the finer elements of punching with power. The remark that Dempsey just basically leant forward and advanced, like he's using his head like a battering ram, just isn't true. You can watch any of the film Dempsey fights, you will see him incorporate a lot of slips, a lot of bobbing and weaving. He uses his shoulder to block certain punches. Hell, in the first minute of the Willard fight, he even retreats a little bit for a moment before picking a different angle. Of all the come-forward heavyweights, Dempsey was the one guy who knew how to circle, right? Mountain lion style. He was one of the most kind of elastic, light-footed of the aggressive guys. The way Cus tries to render him into just this stiff, bent-over guy does not square at all with those who were familiar with the Mauler and how good he was at closing the gap. The comment about Dempsey being particularly vulnerable to Ali's style may be true, but the opposite may be true as well. Gene Tunney is probably the closest thing we've got to a similar opponent to Ali. He fought quite upright, the hands were low, he used a lot of lateral movement, relied on his feet to get him out of the way. And an older Dempsey, definitely past his prime at 32, of course Dec Tunney in the famous long count, he was able to manoeuvre that guy to the ropes and smash him with a nice salvo of punches. And perhaps the ultimate irony we have here is that if we just freeze frame that bent over posture and we think, who is that most similar to out of all the great come forward guys? it's going to have to be Joe Frazier, who of course also shared his honey punch with Jack Dempsey, the left hook, which, as we know now, the evidence, the data's been in for a while, that was the punch Ali was most vulnerable to. Does it mean Dempsey could replicate what Frazier did in Fight of the Century? No, possibly not. Kind of different styles, little differences between the two, but there's a lot of overlap there. So to try and put forward this idea that Dempsey doesn't have a chance, again, they were talking pre-Frazier, going off what we know now, I think it's fair to say that Dempsey is at least a tough night's work. Does the fact that Cus D'Amato, I believe, is well off about this one, reduce him in any way at all? No, it doesn't. It's just a guy who knew so much, who just happened to get something a little bit off the mark. You might say, well, Ted, who are you, right? Are you going to be outranking here, Cus D'Amato? Well, I'll just leave the last remark for my man Jack. He once famously said, no man has everything.